What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Sharks Auto. Hope you're doing well. So for the first time in years, I went to the Canadian International AutoShow. And like I said, I haven't been since I was a kid, and I really expected there to be mostly econoboxes and commuter cars, things like, hybrid RAV4s, Priuses, basic Civics. I didn't expect to see a ton of enthusiast cars or performance models because realistically, not a lot of people can afford these things. The auto show is kind of designed for people walking in to buy a car, but I was pleasantly surprised. Well, there still were a ton of commuter cars, don't get me wrong, but there ended up being way more enthusiast cars than I thought there were going to be. And I want to just take some time to go through my highlights, in case you missed the show and you want to see what you missed. Maybe you're just interested to hear what somebody else has to say. Maybe you're watching because you just like me. Who knows? But I want to just go through what I thought was cool from the show. So we'll start with, entire exhibits that I think were done very well, and then kind of move down and get more granular into things like individual standout cars or just one-offs that I thought were cool. But without further ado, let's jump into the highlights. So the first exhibit that I think was probably my favorite was BMW. Now, BMW easily, I think, had the best exhibit. They had an entire floor to themselves, and the interesting part is that they probably had one of the largest, if not the largest exhibit there, but probably the lowest amount of cars. They had so much space, and they think they made an excellent use of white space in this. They didn't take up too much space with just putting cars everywhere, and the cars that they did bring were nice to see. They brought out most of the M cars, they brought out sports bikes, they brought out the M SUVs, and while they did have some basic commuter and full electric cars, they kind of put them in a separate part of the exhibit that made them feel like a separate exhibit. Meaning you kind of walk in and you'd see all the M cars and everything, and then if you walk into a different room, you can see the all-electric stuff, but they felt like two completely distinct rooms. Now, seeing cars like, the M4 in person was amazing. The M4, I think, is one of the best looking sports coupes of our current era, and perhaps one of their many showstoppers was the M5 wagon. Now, who doesn't love a wagon, let alone an M5? This is cool because I got to sit inside the M5 wagon. That was a lot of fun. I didn't realize they'd let people touch some of these cars. That was cool. They had the M2 competition out, which, again, amazing to see. It's a performance monster. I think they had some of the 40i's, meaning the M8 40i, and I think I saw an M3 40i. The M3 40i was cool to see because that's a car that I'd want maybe as like a second car whenever I save up some more money. Of course, I still need to save up money for the first fun car, but the M3 40i and maybe something like the RS3 are in contention for the second fun car eventually. And as we kept going, they had their sports SUVs out. Now, I think BMW right now is killing the game when it comes to sports SUVs. Like, for a while, I think Dodge and Jeep were on top with the Durango and the Trackhawk, and I like them a lot, but I just think BMW really deserves a shout out for what they've done with cars like the X3M, the X5M. They're very nice, very, very fast. Audi's coming up too, but BMW kind of split their section, I guess, into M cars and M SUVs on one side, and the M SUVs, they just look good. I really think we're in the golden era of performance SUVs now, where it's kind of the lines between performance cars and performance SUVs are starting to get blurred now. A dedicated track car will, of course, blow the doors off of a sports SUV, but it used to be the case that sports SUVs were just so much slower than performance cars. They shouldn't even be in the conversation if you want a fun car. Whereas now, if you want a fun car, a lot of people will comfortably recommend you a sports SUV. Moving on to then perhaps my second favorite exhibit was Audi. So Audi was similar in BMW in the sense that they made a very good use of white space, but I think Audi kind of made theirs feel more like an experience. So when you entered Audi's, you'd be greeted by a bunch of different screens and kind of exhibits showing different things. Oops, I forgot to mute my phone for this video. Let me do that quickly. But yeah, Audi, when you entered, had some screens showing things about the history of the brand. They had some of their SUVs parked outside. They had a giant sign on the wall saying Audi, which of course BMW did as well. But Audi wasn't open concept like BMW was. BMW was just a hall you could walk through. Audi had kind of rooms and stages set up, so it kind of felt like an experience, for lack of a better term. I think they made a really good use of the space they had. BMW definitely had more space, but Audi just made very, very good use of it. Now, I put Audi at second because of their representation, meaning BMW had M cars almost only, aside from the electric cars, whereas Audi they had a lot more of their A series than the RS cars or the S cars, which I guess is fine because Audi's A series is still very, very good. But it's as if you walked into BMW and they had, a bunch of the M40i cars, and instead of like the actual M2s, M3s, M4s, and M5s. So there's a trade-off there. For me, I would have loved to see like an RS5 or something there. But I think the only RS car they had was the RS3, which, like I just said, is in contention for the second car I'd want to own. It was amazing to see. They had a bunch of their SUVs there, which is a plus. They had, I think, the RSQ8, the Audi S5, sorry, what am I saying? The SQ5, and the RSQ8 is one of my favorite sports SUVs right now. I think it's definitely better than the Lamborghini Urus in my opinion. If you're talking about value, like you're getting a very, very similar interior that probably uses some of the same parts, the exact same powertrain and drivetrain. I think it looks better than the Urus, and it's cheaper. I think it's a no-brainer there. That's just my opinion, and it has such presence on the road, perhaps more so than the Urus. But I would think from Audi, I just wanted to see a few more higher end cars. But that being said, it was still a very good exhibit, good enough to be my number two. And I think the Germans really showed out at this year's auto show. If we continue, my next favorite exhibit was Ford. And this is interesting because everything that Audi and BMW did well, Ford really didn't. Meaning, I think Ford had an extremely poor use of space and it did not feel like an experience. But then that begs the question, why is Ford even in my top three? Well, part of it is that Ford, while they had, I think, they just kind of plopped cars everywhere. They had a lot of econoboxes, but they did have some cool Mustangs. Some of the truck trims were actually cool to see. On top of that, they kind of had just constant things going on. So they had a presenter talking about something Ford was doing on one side. I think they had some mascots from the Toronto Maple Leafs team. They had a Bronco dedicated to the Leafs, which was cool to see. So while they didn't, I think, try to make an experience or try to appear super organized, they still made something that was fun and memorable, which is why they still made it into my top three. I was debating just maybe listing the Mustangs as one-offs I liked, but I realized I remember the Ford exhibit more than I do the other ones. So they did something right. So maybe they lacked focus, I guess. But that being said, some of the Mustangs they had out, like they had the Mach-E, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but they had the Dark Horse. I think they had the Mustang GTD. I don't remember seeing a GT500, but they must have had one. I feel like that only makes sense. That being said, they had a bunch of the trucks out, which surprisingly, I enjoyed seeing things like the Tremor in person. I realized the Tremor does look very nice when it's in the F-150. I think they had some of the Super Duties out and about. I've never been the hugest truck guy, but I don't not like trucks. I guess who doesn't, right? Now, if we continue on, they had the Broncos out, which I never really liked them, but seeing them in person, they were pretty cool. And like I said, they had that Bronco dedicated to the Maple Leafs, which that's just cool. The show is in Toronto, so they showed out a little bit for Toronto that I can appreciate. But as we move away from exhibits, we can now enter the section about supercars and hypercars. So I was very surprised by the amount of supercars and hypercars. I always get confused between the difference between them, so I'm just going to call them both, whether it's a supercar or a hypercar. But there were just a lot of high-end performance cars at the auto show, more so than I expected. There was a single exhibit there that I'm pretty sure would have been worth around $8 million or more. They had the Aston Martin Valhalla and the Bugatti the Bugatti Mistral Pearl La Pearl Rare, or something like that. I have it written down somewhere in my notes. Bugatti Mistral La Pearl Rare. It's a one of one. So I think just those two cars together, the Aston Martin Valhalla and the Bugatti, will probably cost about 8 million Canadian. Probably not 8 million American, but the Valhalla is a crazy car. If you don't know, it's got over 1,000 wheel horsepower and it might be crank. I don't know if it's wheel or crank horsepower, but it does 0 to 100 kilometers an hour or 0 to 60 miles per hour in 2.5 seconds, which is, I know TikTok has desensitized us to numbers like that, but just think about that for a second. Like a Golf GTI is doing 0 to 100 in the high 6 seconds. This is doing 0 to 100 in 2.5 seconds, which is just ridiculous. And as great as the Valhalla is, I felt that having that one-of-one Bugatti in the same exhibit kind of overshadowed the Valhalla a bit. Like everyone was in awe of the Bugatti and kind of forgot that there's an Aston Martin right there that's probably one of the best cars they've ever produced. But that being said, I think the Bugatti rightfully stole the show. Like it looked like a work of art in the sense that a Pagani is a work of art, and at the same time, it's still a Bugatti with probably, I assume, their W16, which that deserves its own video. I can't even talk about the W16 in this video. It'll just take up too much time. Now, they also had a lot of early 2000s exotics like the 2008, I think, Ford GT, just a ton of exotics that I grew up with, which was cool. And now if you were born in, late 90s, early 2000s, you can relate. These are cars that you kind of spend hours playing Need for Speed just to afford in the game, that they just had an entire lineup. So in one row, I think they had a Bugatti Chiron, a Mercedes SLR McLaren, 911 GT3R, Murcielago SV, Diablo SVR, SF90, and a Koenigsegg CCR. Like that sounds like a dream lineup in a Need for Speed game. Like that sounds like what the garage I would have built as a 12-year-old that had nothing else to do other than play Need for Speed. And that was just stunning to see in person. Now, I was using my action camera there, and the action cameras aren't the best at taking pictures. They're very good at taking videos, and I didn't take any pictures. What I did is I just recorded and I took clips of the video as my images for the article, and that was a mistake because I recorded at 4K 30, meaning 30 frames per second, and if I wasn't standing perfectly still for a few frames, each individual frame is kind of blurry, so that means my snapshots were kind of blurry. I should have probably recorded at 4K 60, so that way, if you stood still for just like a second, you could probably get some still shots in there and export them better, but forget all of that. What my point is that I'm very surprised that I got a very, very good shot of this lineup in a video that I could get as a still, and I'll put that up maybe on the screen, or maybe I'll just play the video of it because the video looks even cooler. But this was just a stunning lineup to see in person. And it doesn't even stop there. Like, I'm not mentioning every super or hypercar that was there. I'm mentioning the ones that I saw and I liked. I also realized after I left the show, I didn't even see the whole thing because I saw people posting things on TikTok that I don't even see, or I didn't see because, one, I don't remember, and two, it's not in my videos. And the final supercar and hypercar exhibit I want to bring up is one that had McLaren and Pagani in there together. I think they had the Pagani Utopia, but McLaren was more impressive because they had kind of a nice timeline of McLaren's legendary cars. They had the F1, which kind of transformed the industry a little bit when it came out. I think it was one of the first cars to bring F1 technology and performance into a street production car. If I'm not mistaken, I think Rowan Atkinson has an F1 and he's goated. If you don't know who he is, go Google him. If you don't know Mr. Bean, you're probably too young to get that reference. Just go watch some of it. I promise you, it's pretty good. Then they had the McLaren P1, which that's a member of the Holy Trinity of cars. I've made, I think, a video and an article about the Holy Trinity and the Unholy Quartet. The Unholy Quartet is something I created. I love that. So go check that out if you have a chance. If I remember as I'm editing, I'll put a link to that video/article somewhere on the top of the screen. I might even be pointing to the wrong side. I don't know. And then they had the McLaren W1, which, in all honesty, I don't know a ton about the W1. All I know is that it's one of their newer cars and it's impressive. It looked really cool in person, so I'll put it up on the screen right now. It probably has been up since I said the word in the first place, but suffice to say, it was cool to see. I'm probably going to Google it a bit more after this video just to learn about it. And I can't end this section off without mentioning the Pagani Utopia again. Someone on TikTok, I don't remember his name, had said a long time ago that Paganis should be treated as works of art, and I am in complete agreement. Throw performance numbers out of the door. The Paganis are fast, that's fine, but they are works of art first, and I think performance cars second. The point of the Pagani was never to set a Nürburgring lap record. The point of the Pagani was to look cool and look expensive, be loud, make somebody look at it and wonder what the hell is that. And I think they've done that. That's what a Pagani does. Every time I see a Pagani, I'm in shock. That being said, that's enough of that. And one of our last sections here is called race cars. Now, full disclosure, I'm not the biggest fan of professional motorsport. Like, I don't follow F1, I don't follow NASCAR. I know nothing about them. I used to follow, I think, Formula Drift a bit, and even then I didn't fully understand it. So here, I don't even know what I'm classifying these cars as. I'm saying what they look like. So if I see a car that I think looks like an F1 car, I'm calling it an F1 car. If I see something that looks like I would have seen it in NASCAR, I'm going to call it a NASCAR model. So bear with me. If you hate it, leave a comment telling me how much you hate it. It'll boost the algorithm anyways. So Cadillac, when we walked through their booth, I ultimately wasn't super impressed with Cadillac's exhibit. It just felt like far too many cars for the space. They could have just displayed a few of their models, and there was also a lot of just kind of basic economy boxes cars, which Fine, that's what they sell. They have to do that. That it just wasn't for me. But they did have their F1 car present, and this thing was stunning, I think, to see in person. I haven't seen many F1 cars in person, so maybe that's why it was impressive to me, but I think they did a good job of kind of isolating it from the rest of their display and making it a nice little eye catcher. Audi did something similar. So I already mentioned Audi's exhibit as my second favorite, and I intentionally didn't mention this part. In addition to all the cars they had, they then had a section cornered off for an Audi F1 car that was on a rotating display, and this thing was awesome, to say the least. It was really impressive. I think, again, Audi, incredible use of space. They just spaced everything out so well that it felt amazing. Cadillac, they did okay with putting the F1 car kind of away from everything, but Audi they did it better. Next, I saw this car twice in the auto show. Once here and once in a second place, and it made me think I was walking in circles. But this is I think a Dodge NASCAR car. Again, if it's not NASCAR, I apologize. I don't know the difference. But this thing was cool because as you walk around it, it looks, like I said, like every other race car, full maybe fiberglass body or something. And then when you get to the inside, the interior is entirely gutted. It had, 2 bottles of what I assume were nitrous. One of them could have been a fire extinguisher. I'm not sure. But this thing was cool. It had a full roll cage, just gutted interior, full race car. And there were also some GT style cars that I saw. There was, I think, a Huracan Evo and a Corvette C8 that were both GT cars from PFAF. I think PFAF had them out in their booth, so that was cool to see. And there was an unexpected favorite at the show. So I was kind of sad when I realized Honda didn't even have a booth at the show, but as I was looking through that GT3, Huracan, and Corvette, I saw something in the back, and I was like, what is that? That was a Honda Fit race build. That was impressive. It looked like a heavily modified Honda Fit, and I was over the moon seeing that. Everyone's complaining that there was no Honda Fits at the auto show. Well, there was one. You just had to go look for it, way in the back of the PFAF exhibit. So that was a joy to see. The Honda Fit is one of the greatest cars of all time. I've said it once, I'll say it again. You can argue with a wall on that one. I also found a Ford Mustang GT3 in the same exhibit and a McLaren M8C. I almost missed the M8C because I completely just walked right past it on the way in, and I only saw it really on the way out. And I was like, I think I know what that car is. So that was really cool to see. If you don't know what the M8C is, I'd recommend you Google it. I know what it is, but I don't remember all the details. So I'm not going to try and butcher it. That's why I'm just saying Google it. And I think this is the second last section now we're at, which is classics. So there were a lot of classics at the auto show, perhaps more than I was expecting. And perhaps one of the coolest exhibits in the show was Oblivion Classics. Now, they were all over the program. They were all over the show's website, so I knew I was going to go there. And it's kind of tucked away in the corner, so I feel like if you didn't read about it beforehand, you might not have bothered walking over there. This was so cool. They had just an entire retro vibe going on. That was, as soon as you enter, they have old CRT TVs, which some people watching are too young to remember what a CRT TV is. They had old school radios. They had so much just nostalgic stuff that made it truly feel like you went back in time when you entered. Right when you walk in, you're greeted by an old Mitsubishi Pajero, which super cool car. Don't really see them that often. You're also, I guess, on the opposite side, you find an Audi Quattro that is just pristine. And as you're walking down, you then find a Lamborghini Diablo and a Honda CRX kind of in the same line with the Audi. And I don't think there was any other exhibit at the show that had that range just within like 25 meters of each other. A Honda, Honda CRX, a Audi Quattro, and a Diablo just right there. If you continue going, they had some other cool cars that I've never even heard of. There was a Nissan Pulsar NX, which really cool looking wagon. There was something called a Geo Tracker that was towing a jet ski. I've never even heard of the Geo Tracker. There was a Ford RS 200S. Never heard of that either, but it looks like a Ford rally car of some sort. There was a Ferrari 308 GTS that I had heard of. There was a Ford Taurus SHO, which I'd heard of it. I'd never seen one quite that old before. And fun fact, I learned this, is that SHO stands for super high output. That is a very simple acronym. Whoa. Acronym. That's a very simple acronym, and it's very, I think, American to just call a car super high output. But that being said, let's move on. There are other classics that I could mention, but I think I'd leave it at just talking about the Oblivion exhibit. Was it as good as, the Audi, the BMW, and the Ford? It was definitely better than Ford. I'd put it on the level of Audi's exhibit. I don't think I would say it was better than the BMW exhibit. I still think BMW takes the cake for the best exhibit. But the last section we have here are the highlights. Now these are just wild cards, kind of random cars that I walked around as a part of maybe another exhibit that I didn't love that was cool, or I was just walking through the show and there's just literally a car park there that was awesome. So again, if you're super young, or maybe not even super young, I guess you could be like 16. If you're born like 2010 or later, you probably don't know about Ghostbusters, but they had a Ghostbusters replica wagon there. It might be called the Ecto one. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But I don't know if this is just like a replica or is it an actual movie prop. I have no idea. There were signs around it. They didn't get picked up too well in the video. I didn't really get to read them when I was there. I think this is just before Audi, is that you just see this parked outside. This was really cool to see. And like I said, if you are old enough to have seen the Ghostbuster movies, this is just even cooler. And next we have GMC. So I didn't love the GMC exhibit for the same reason. I guess I didn't really like the Cadillac. GMC was perhaps worse so because they didn't really have any sports cars or enthusiast cars there. They're GMC. They're going to show off their trucks. And I like trucks, so it wasn't terrible, but there were actually more like economy grade SUVs than there were trucks. Anyway, enough of that. Let's forget all of that. They had a super cool exhibit, which I think was with their GMC Sierras or their Denalis. I think it was Sierras. You'll see it in the video. I can't see the video right now. I'm just kind of talking. But they had two Sierras parked, and on top of them was another Sierra to show off the towing capacity. And I think what was cooler is, as I was looking at this, these trucks were supporting another truck, and the suspension didn't even look like it was squatting even a little bit. And I know these are trucks designed to do that, so I shouldn't be surprised. But I'm always surprised when I see a truck pulling something heavy and the suspension's not even, working. So that was cool to see. I think it was a very clever way to show off their capabilities and their trucks. There were a few one-off booths. HKS had a booth, which I really wish I could spend more time at the HKS booth, but there was just so many people there. They were busy. I was hungry. I was tired. I was trying to get out, but I couldn't not stop at the HKS booth even for a second. There was a fully built HKS RX-7 there, which was so cool. It was awesome. I couldn't get super close to it, but they did let people get closer than I thought they would. That being said, you'll see in the videos how close I could get to it. It was really nice to see. Sung Khan, if you don't know Han from Tokyo Drift, Fast and Furious, one of the few actors in that movie, maybe outside of Paul Walker, that is a real car guy. He has a new movie coming out, and he was at the auto show. I didn't get to meet him, unfortunately, but he had a little booth, and there was a really cool IS350 there, as well as a Toyota Sprinter. And if you just keep walking a little bit past the Toyota Sprinter, there was an RWB Porsche, which I know some people have mixed opinions on these. Some people say they're butchered Porsches that were built by some old Japanese man. I think they're cool. I think they're works of art, just like the Paganis are. I appreciate them. And perhaps the last thing I'll mention is that I don't even know if this made it into my article, but there was actually two more things that I'm realizing now didn't make it into the article. So while I can't see the video, I can see my article. So there was a full-size 1950s Cadillac made entirely of Lego. If you went to the show or even thinking about it, you probably heard about this. It was advertised everywhere. And Monster Racing also had a booth set up. They had a huge lifted, what was it? I think a Ford Super Duty. It was big. Like my eye level, I think, was kind of at the front bumper. So that was cool. And they had just a whole bunch of little racing sims set up. You'll be seeing videos of that on the screen right now. So there you have it. These were my highlights from the 2026 Canadian International Auto Show. If you haven't been in a few years, I'd recommend going next year if it's going to be anything like it was this year. I thought it was pretty good. If you guys like this video, please let me know. Thanks for watching. You guys can check me out on www.sharksauto.com to see the blog for more details with photos. And if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.